In the vast emptiness of space, where entire civilizations rise and fall without a whisper, there exists a truth that even the most advanced species refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes the most primitive creatures possess the rarest gift of all, compassion without expectation of reward. When salvage operator Marcus Chun pulled a dying alien from the wreckage of an unknown vessel, he had no idea he was about to shatter the fundamental beliefs of a galaxy-spanning empire. He didn't know that this single act of human kindness would mark him as either the greatest hero or the most dangerous threat the universe had ever seen. Some said humans were just clever apes who stumbled into the stars. Others whispered they were demons wearing masks of flesh. But none of them, not the cold logic of the hierarchy, not the ancient wisdom of the eternal clans, not even the vast computational networks of the machine collectives, understood what made humans truly terrifying. It wasn't their weapons. It wasn't their technology. It wasn't even their stubborn refusal to surrender when facing impossible odds. It was their ability to see a dying enemy and choose mercy over vengeance. To risk everything for a stranger. To change the course of galactic history with nothing more than basic human decency. Marcus Chun was about to prove that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't hatred or fear or greed. Sometimes it's simply giving a damn about someone else's life. And the galaxy would never be the same. Marcus Chun had seen enough space wrecks to know when something was wrong. The twisted metal drifting through the asteroid field looked like every other piece of debris that littered this forgotten corner of the galaxy, but his instruments were screaming warnings he'd never heard before. The salvage computer, a reliable piece of technology that had helped him make a living for 15 years, was displaying readings that made no sense. Unknown alloy composition, he muttered, reading the data stream flowing across his console. Energy signatures off the charts, but the whole thing's been dead for... hell, how long has this been floating out here? The Lucky Strike, his modified cargo hauler, drifted closer to the wreckage. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts in this business. Most salvage operators went for the obvious scores, the clearly marked ships with valuable cargo holds. But Marcus had always been drawn to the mysteries, the pieces that didn't fit the pattern. It's what kept him alive when other salvagers ended up dead or worse. This wreck was different, though. The metal wasn't like anything in the standard databases. It seemed to shift color slightly as the ship's lights played across its surface, moving from deep blue to silver to something that reminded him of oil on water. The hull design was elegant in a way that human engineering rarely achieved, all flowing curves and graceful lines, even in its destroyed state. "Computer, scan for life signs," he commanded, though he expected the usual negative response. Nothing survived in hard vacuum for long, especially not in a wreck that looked like it had been floating for decades. The pause was longer than usual. Then, detecting faint biosignatures. Extremely low metabolic activity. Recommend immediate investigation. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. In 15 years of salvage work, he'd never found anything alive in a derelict. The computer had to be malfunctioning. But as he maneuvered closer, his external cameras picked up something that made his blood run cold. Through a gaping hole in the alien vessel's hull, he could see movement, barely perceptible but definitely there. Something was alive inside that wreck, and from the bio readings, whatever it was wouldn't be alive much longer. "Shit," Marcus whispered, his hands already moving across the controls. He'd sworn off rescue operations years ago after losing too many friends to what they called Good Samaritan syndrome in the salvage business. But something about those faint life signs pulled at him in a way he couldn't ignore. The Lucky Strike S-docking clamps found purchase on the alien hull with surprising ease, as if the unknown metal wanted to be boarded. Marcus suited up quickly, checking his oxygen levels and emergency medical supplies. If something was alive in there, he needed to work fast. The airlock cycled, and Marcus stepped into the alien vessel. The artificial gravity was still functioning, which was impossible given the obvious damage to the ship's power systems. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows along corridors that seemed designed for beings much larger than humans. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than his eyes could process. Following the biosignature readings on his scanner, Marcus made his way deeper into the ship. The temperature was dropping steadily, and ice crystals had formed on every surface. Whatever life support systems remained were clearly failing. The readings led him to what appeared to be a command chamber, though the design was unlike any ship's bridge he'd ever seen. Instead of chairs and control panels, the room contained a series of what looked like crystalline trees growing from the floor. And there, collapsed among the crystal formations, was something that defied every classification Marcus knew. The creature was massive, easily 3 meters long, with a serpentine body covered in scales that shifted from deep purple to electric blue. For powerful legs ending in clawed hands were curled beneath it, and a magnificent head rested on the deck plates. Most striking were the wings, translucent membranes stretched between elegant bone structures, now folded tight against the creature's sides. A dragon. Marcus was looking at an honest-to-God alien dragon. The creature's breathing was shallow, barely visible even with his suit's enhanced vision. Ice crystals had formed around its nostrils, and its scales had lost much of their color. It was dying, and had been for a long time. Marcus knelt beside the massive head, his mind racing. The creature was beautiful in a way that made his chest tight, like looking at a sunset or hearing perfect music. But more than that, there was something about its features that spoke of intelligence, of a mind behind those closed eyes that might rival human consciousness. "Hey there, big guy," Marcus whispered, though his suit's external speakers made his voice sound mechanical. "Let's see if we can help you out." The dragon's eyes opened slowly, revealing irises that swirled like galaxies. For a moment, Marcus felt a sensation like falling, as if he were looking into infinite depths. Then the creature blinked, and the feeling passed. Those alien eyes focused on Marcus with obvious effort. The dragon's head moved slightly, and Marcus heard something that made him freeze. The creature was trying to speak. The words came out as a series of harmonic tones that seemed to bypass his ears entirely, resonating directly in his bones. But somehow, impossibly, Marcus understood the meaning. "Help my people. The cold ones come." Then, the dragon's eyes closed again, and its breathing became even more labored. Marcus didn't hesitate. He activated his suit's emergency medical scanner, trying to get readings on the creature's vital signs. The results were confusing but clear enough: hypothermia, severe dehydration, and what looked like some kind of energy depletion that his equipment couldn't properly identify. "Computer, emergency medical protocols," he commanded through his comm link to the Lucky Strike. "Prepare the cargo hold for emergency life support. I'm bringing someone aboard." Marcus, his ship's AI, replied with the voice of his long-dead sister Sarah, a modification he'd made years ago for company on long trips. "That biosignature isn't human." "Are you sure about this?" Marcus looked down at the dying dragon, at the elegant features, and the scales that still held hints of their former magnificence. Something deep in his chest made the decision for him. "I'm sure, Sarah. Prep the medical bay and heat the cargo hold to maximum safe temperature. We're going to save this one." The process of moving the dragon took nearly 4 hours. The creature was heavier than Marcus had expected, and moving it without causing additional injury required careful planning and multiple trips to set up an improvised transport system using his salvage equipment. Throughout the process, the dragon remained semi-conscious, occasionally opening those galaxy-deep eyes to watch Marcus work. There was something in that gaze that reminded Marcus of his grandfather in his final days, a kind of resigned acceptance mixed with surprise at receiving unexpected kindness. By the time Marcus finally got the dragon settled in the Lucky Strike as cargo hold, both he and his ship's life support systems were strained to their limits. The improvised medical setup was crude, but functional, providing warmth, hydration, and a breathable atmosphere that his computer had synthesized based on gas traces from the alien ship. Marcus sat beside his unexpected passenger, watching the slow rise and fall of the creature's massive chest. The dragon's color was already improving, scales shifting from dull gray back toward their natural purple-blue shimmer. But the medical readouts showed damage that would take time to heal if it could heal at all. "What am I going to do with you?" Marcus asked quietly. The dragon's eyes opened again, focusing on him with what seemed like greater clarity than before. This time, when the harmonics came, they were stronger, more complex. Marcus felt the meaning settle into his mind like a memory he'd forgotten. "You have shown mercy to the ancient enemy. This changes the pattern. The hierarchy will come for you now, as they came for my people. But perhaps this is how the wheel turns at last." Marcus frowned. "Ancient enemy? Hierarchy? I don't understand." The dragon's massive head moved slightly, what might have been an attempt at a smile on those alien features. "You are human. Your species is feared throughout the galaxy. They do not know it. My people, we were tasked with your destruction. But you saved me instead of claiming vengeance. The equations are broken now. Everything changes. Tasked with our destruction." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "By who?" But the dragon's eyes had closed again, and its breathing had settled into what looked like natural sleep rather than the labored struggle of before. Whatever answers it might have were locked away for now. Marcus stood slowly, his mind spinning with implications he didn't want to consider. He'd spent his life on the edges of galactic civilization, avoiding the politics and conflicts of the major species. Earth was barely a footnote in most star charts, humanity a minor curiosity at best. But if this dragon was telling the truth, everything Marcus thought he knew about humanity's place in the galaxy was wrong. And somehow, by saving a dying alien, he'd stumbled into the middle of something vast and dangerous. The salvage business had always been risky, but Marcus had a feeling that his biggest dangers were just beginning. He made his way to the Lucky Strike, his cockpit, and began plotting a course away from the asteroid field. The dragon needed proper medical attention, and Marcus needed answers. But first, they both needed to get far away from wherever this mysterious alien ship had come from. As the ship's engines came online, Marcus caught sight of something on his long-range sensors that made his blood freeze. Ships were approaching the asteroid field, lots of them, moving in formation patterns that screamed military precision. "Sarah," he called to his ship's AI, "how fast can we get out of here?" "Unknown vessels detected," came the reply. "Configuration matches no known human or registered alien designs. Recommend immediate departure." Marcus didn't need to be told twice. The Lucky Strike jumped to hyperspace just as the first of the unknown ships entered sensor range, carrying Marcus Chun and his sleeping passenger toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the alien wreck that had started it all was quickly reduced to atoms by weapons that left no trace of their passing. But the damage was already done. The pattern was broken, the equations changed, and somewhere in the depths of space, ancient minds began to stir with the realization that the game had fundamentally changed. The humans, those primitive apes who had somehow stumbled into the stars, had done the impossible. They had shown mercy to their enemies. The galaxy would never be the same. 3 days in a hyperspace, the dragon finally spoke again. Marcus had been dozing in the pilot's chair when the harmonic tones filled the ship's cabin, more complex and nuanced than before. This time, the meaning that settled into his mind came with images, flashes of memory that weren't his own. "I'm called Siraith in your tongue. I am of the Draconic Remnant, last of the Starflight clans. And you, Marcus Chun of Terra, have become the most dangerous being in the galaxy." Marcus jerked fully awake, his hand instinctively moving to the plasma pistol at his side before he remembered who he was talking to. The dragon, Siraith, had somehow moved from the cargo hold to the main cabin while Marcus slept. The creature's bulk filled nearly half the space, but it had positioned itself carefully to avoid blocking any critical systems. "How did you get in here?" Marcus asked, then felt foolish. The cargo hold doors were designed for machinery, not to contain a determined alien. Siratha's great head tilted slightly, and Marcus caught what he was beginning to recognize as amusement in those galaxy-deep eyes. Your ship is well designed for its purpose, but Dragonkind has moved through tighter spaces than this. I wish to speak with you properly, and the cargo hold felt impersonal for such a conversation. The dragon's voice in Marcus's mind was stronger now, clearer, carrying subtleties of emotion that hadn't been there before. Recovery was happening faster than Marcus had expected. You said I was dangerous, Marcus said, settling back in his chair but keeping his hand near his weapon out of habit. You also said your people were tasked with destroying humanity. I think you owe me some explanations. Siratha was quiet for a long moment, those massive eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. When the dragon finally spoke, the mental voice carried a weight of sadness that seemed to echo through the ship. To understand the danger you represent, you must first understand the galaxy as it truly is, not as your species believes it to be. What do you know of the hierarchy? Marcus shrugged. Never heard of them. But then, I'm just a salvage operator. I don't pay much attention to galactic politics. The hierarchy is not politics, Marcus Chun. They are the fundamental organizing principle of our galaxy. For 50,000 years, they have maintained order through a simple concept. Every species has its place, its role, its purpose. The strong rule, the weak serve, and the balance is maintained. Images flash through Marcus's mind, carried by Siratha's words. Vast space stations where beings of crystalline beauty issued commands to lesser races. Fleets of ships so large they blocked out stars. Worlds stripped bare to feed the endless hunger of galactic order. The hierarchy determines which species may advance, which may explore the stars, which must remain planet-bound. They decide population limits, technological development, territorial boundaries. In return for this order, there's been peace across the galaxy for millennia. That doesn't sound like peace, Marcus said. That sounds like slavery. Siratha's mental voice carried approval, and something that might have been hope. Yes, but it is stable slavery, predictable oppression. The alternative, they claim, is chaos. War. The destruction of all civilization as species fight over resources and territory without limit. Marcus stood up, pacing the small space of the cabin. So where do humans fit into this hierarchy? The silence stretched long enough that Marcus began to think Siratha wouldn't answer. When the dragon finally spoke, the mental voice was barely a whisper. Humans don't fit, Marcus Chun. That's the problem. More images flooded Marcus's mind, but these were different. He saw vast databases filled with biological and psychological profiles of thousands of species. Each entry was neat, categorized, predictable. But one section of the database was marked in symbols that hurt to look at, symbols that somehow conveyed absolute prohibition. When your species was first discovered, the hierarchy's analysts spent decades trying to classify you. They tested human prisoners, studied your history, analyzed your psychological patterns. Every time, they reached the same conclusion, which was, humans are an extinction-level threat to galactic order. Not because you're the strongest, or the smartest, or even the most aggressive. Because you are unpredictable in ways that break their fundamental equations. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of unpredictable? Siratha's great head moved closer, until Marcus could see his own reflection in those galaxy-deep eyes. You show mercy to enemies. You sacrifice yourselves for strangers. You choose principles over survival. The hierarchy's models cannot account for these behaviors because they appear to serve no evolutionary purpose. In their view, such irrationality can only lead to chaos. So they decided to wipe us out? They tried. 3 times over the past 2 centuries, the hierarchy has sent extermination fleets toward your solar system. Each time, they were stopped by species who were supposed to be loyal servants of galactic order. Species who somehow decided that maybe, just maybe, the hierarchy was wrong about humans. Asterisk Marcus sank back into his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. You said your people were tasked with destroying us. We were the fourth attempt. The draconic remnant was chosen because we were believed to be incorruptible. We have served the hierarchy faithfully for 15,000 years, enforcing their will across 100 star systems. We were their perfect weapons against the human threat. Asterisk, what changed? Siratha's mental voice carried a complexity of emotion that made Marcus's chest tight. Regret, shame, and something that might have been wonder. We studied your species as we had been commanded. We observed your worlds, analyzed your behaviors, prepared for extermination. But the more we learned about humans, the more we began to question our orders. We saw humans die protecting other species. We saw them share resources with former enemies. We watched them choose the difficult path over the easy one, again and again, for no reason the hierarchy's logic could explain. Asterisk, so you refused? Worse, we began to wonder if the hierarchy was wrong about the fundamental nature of order itself. If perhaps true stability comes not from imposed hierarchy, but from voluntary cooperation. From trust instead of fear. Asterisk, the images in Marcus's mind shifted, showing great draconic ships turning away from Earth's solar system, their weapons powering down instead of charging. He saw the elegant forms of dragon kind gathering in hidden places, arguing in harmonic languages about concepts that had no names. The hierarchy discovered our hesitation. We were declared corrupted, marked for elimination alongside the humans we had refused to destroy. What you found in that asteroid field was all that remained of my people's fleet after the hierarchy's enforcers finished with us. Asterisk Marcus was quiet for a long time, watching the stars streak past through the cabin's viewports. The scope of what Siraith was describing was almost impossible to grasp. Humanity wasn't just some backwater species stumbling through space. They were apparently the center of a galactic conflict that had been raging for centuries. Why are you telling me all this? He finally asked. Because what you did changes everything. When you chose to save me instead of leaving me to die, you proved something that the hierarchy claims is impossible. Asterisk, which is that their fundamental assumption about intelligent life is wrong. They believe that self-interest always trumps altruism, that given the choice between personal gain and helping others, rational beings will always choose themselves. Your decision to risk your life for a stranger, an alien stranger who by all rights should be your enemy, breaks their core philosophy. Asterisk Siraith moved closer until Marcus could feel the warmth radiating from the dragon's scales. But, more than that, you saved me without knowing anything about the larger conflict. You didn't help me because it served some strategic purpose, or because you thought it might benefit humanity. You saved me simply because I was dying and you could help. That kind of pure altruism is supposed to be evolutionary impossible. Asterisk Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. So by doing the decent thing, I've somehow made myself a target for this hierarchy? You've made yourself something much more dangerous than a target. Marcus Chun, you made yourself a symbol. Word of what you did is already spreading through the hidden networks that exist beneath the hierarchy's notice. There are species that have served them for millennia who are beginning to ask questions they've never dared ask before. Asterisk the dragon's mental voice carried a note of something that might have been excitement. If a primitive species like humanity can produce individuals capable of such selfless action, what does that say about the hierarchy's claims of human primitiveness? If even humans can choose cooperation over competition, mercy over vengeance, what does that say about the necessity of imposed order? Asterisk Marcus stood up again, this time moving to the ship's communication console. You're saying there's going to be some kind of rebellion? I'm saying there already is. It's been building for decades, species questioning the hierarchy in secret, forming alliances that official channels know nothing about. Your rescue of me has provided something these potential rebels have been lacking. Asterisk, which is proof that the hierarchy is wrong about the fundamental nature of intelligent life. And, more importantly, proof that humans might be exactly what the galaxy needs to break free from 50,000 years of enforced stagnation. Marcus's hands moved across the communication controls, checking for messages, scanning for signs of pursuit. The long-range sensors showed empty space in all directions, but somehow that didn't make him feel safer. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now, Marcus-chun, you have a choice to make. The hierarchy knows what you've done, and they will never stop hunting you. You could try to hide, find some distant world, and hope they never track you down. But we both know that's not really an option." Marcus looked at Siraith, at the magnificent alien creature that had somehow become his responsibility and his companion. "What's the alternative? Help me contact the resistance networks. Use what you've done, what you represent, to unite the species that are tired of living under the hierarchy's rule. Become the symbol that sparks a galactic revolution." "I'm just a salvage operator," Marcus protested. "I don't know anything about leading revolutions." Siraitha's mental voice carried gentle amusement. "You're a human who chose compassion over self-interest when it mattered most. In a galaxy ruled by enforced selfishness, that makes you the most qualified revolutionary leader imaginable." Marcus stared out at the stars, trying to imagine himself as some kind of galactic rebel leader. It seemed absurd. But then, again, 3 days ago, the idea of having conversation with an alien dragon would have seemed absurd too. "The hierarchy," he said slowly. "How powerful are they really? They control 90% of the galaxy's habitable systems. Their military is larger than most species' entire populations. They have technology that can crack planets and weapons that can sterilize entire star systems. And you think a human salvage operator and one dragon can stand against that?" Siraith's great head tilted, and Marcus caught that sense of amusement again. "I think a human salvage operator who shows mercy to dying enemies represents something that no amount of military power can defeat. Hope, Marcus-chun. You represent hope that things can be different." The communication console beeped, indicating an incoming transmission on emergency frequencies. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then opened the channel. A woman's voice filled the cabin, speaking accented English with urgency that cut through the static. "Marcus-chun of Terra, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the merchant vessel Dancing Star. We know what you did at the asteroid field. We know what you're carrying. There are hierarchy hunter-killers less than 6 hours behind you, and they're not taking prisoners." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "How do you know who I am?" "Because the dragon you saved isn't the only survivor of that massacre. Some of us have been watching, waiting for someone like you to finally tip the balance. If you want to live to see another sunrise, alter course to the coordinates I'm transmitting and prepare for emergency docking. The revolution starts now, whether you're ready or not." The transmission ended, leaving Marcus staring at navigation coordinates that pointed toward a system he'd never heard of. Siraith's mental voice was soft, almost gentle. "It seems the choice has been made for you, Marcus-chun. The question now is whether you'll embrace what you've become or try to run from it." Marcus looked at the coordinates, at the vast alien presence filling his cabin, at the star-filled darkness that suddenly seemed full of hidden watchers and ancient enemies. Then, he entered the new course into the navigation system and prepared to jump toward whatever destiny awaited them both. The salvage operator was done. It was time to see what kind of revolutionary he might become. The coordinates led them to a system that officially didn't exist. Marcus checked his star charts 3 times, but there was no record of the red dwarf star or its collection of small planets in any database his ship carried. According to galactic navigation records, this sector contained nothing but empty space and radiation hazards that made it unsuitable for exploration. "Clever," Siraith observed from where the dragon had coiled in the ship's common area. "The hierarchy's own bureaucracy works against them. They catalog everything so thoroughly that they sometimes overlook their own blind spots." The Lucky Strike dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, and immediately Marcus's sensors went crazy. The supposedly empty space around them was filled with ships, hundreds of them, representing designs he'd never seen before. Some were clearly of alien construction, all flowing curves and organic shapes. Others looked like human vessels that had been modified with technology that shouldn't exist. Asterisk Lucky Strike asterisk. This is Dancing Star. Came a transmission they've been waiting for. Follow the navigation beacons to the station. Welcome to Haven. As they moved deeper into the system, Marcus began to understand the scope of what he was seeing. The third planet from the star had been completely transformed, its surface covered with what looked like cities but functioned like massive shipyards. Vessels in various stages of construction filled orbital platforms that stretched from the planet's surface to its 3 moons. This is a military operation, Marcus said, more to himself than to Siraith. Indeed, but not the kind the hierarchy would recognize. Look more closely at the ship designs. Asterisk Marcus adjusted his sensors, focusing on the vessels around them. At first glance, they looked like typical warships, all armor and weapons and angular aggression. But as he studied them more carefully, he began to notice unusual features. Medical bays that were larger than the weapon systems. Cargo holds designed for civilian transport rather than military supplies. Defensive systems that were clearly meant to protect rather than conquer. These aren't ships built for invasion, Marcus realized. They're built for evacuation. The rebellion knows it cannot match the hierarchy's military power directly. So they prepare for a different kind of war. A war to save as many lives as possible when the current order finally collapses. Asterisk the Lucky Strike was guided to a docking bay on one of the smaller orbital stations. As Marcus began the docking procedures, he could see figures moving in the bay's observation windows. Some were clearly human, but others represented species he couldn't identify. All of them seemed to be watching his ship with intense interest. Nervous? Siraith asked, and Marcus realized the dragon was picking up on his emotional state somehow. Terrified, Marcus admitted, I'm a salvage operator, not some kind of galactic hero. What if they're expecting something I can't deliver? Then, you tell them the truth, as you told me. Sometimes honesty is the most revolutionary act possible. Asterisk the docking clamp secured with a solid thunk, and Marcus heard the hiss of atmosphere equalizing. A few minutes later, his airlock chimed with an incoming boarding request. Marcus opened the lock to find a woman who matched the voice from the transmission. Elena Vasquez was smaller than he'd expected, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she'd seen more than her share of violence. Behind her stood 3 other figures that made Marcus's breath catch. One was clearly human, a tall man with the kind of scars that came from plasma burns. But the other 2 were alien in ways that his mind struggled to process. One appeared to be made of living crystal, its faceted form refracting the light from the airlock into rainbow patterns. The other was something that might have been plant or animal, all flowing tendrils and shifting green surfaces. Marcus Chun, Elena said, stepping forward with her hand extended. Thank you for coming. And thank you for proving that the reports about human nature weren't exaggerated. Marcus shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip. Reports. We've been studying your species for decades, the crystalline being said, its voice like wind chimes in a storm. I am resonance of truth of the Chorus Collective. We were among the first to question the hierarchy's assessment of human threat potential. The plant-like alien moved forward with surprising grace. I am Forest Singer of the Growth Web. My people have been curious about humans since your first ships appeared in our territory. You did not behave as the hierarchy's models predicted. Meaning, Marcus asked. Elena smiled, but there was sadness in it. Meaning you didn't try to conquer us, enslave us, or strip mine our worlds. In fact, most human explorers seemed more interested in talking to us than fighting us. It was very confusing for species that had been told you were savage primitives. Siraith's bulk filled the airlock entrance behind Marcus. The 3 aliens showed no fear, but Marcus noticed they moved slightly to give the dragon room. Siraith of the Remnant, Elena said with obvious respect. We mourn when we learned what happened to your people. The hierarchy will pay for that atrocity. Perhaps, Siraith replied, and Marcus realized the dragon was somehow communicating with all of them simultaneously. But vengeance is not our goal. Liberation is. Show Marcus what you have built here. The tour of Haven Station took 3 hours and left Marcus's head spinning. What he'd taken for a simple rebel base was actually a vast underground network that spanned dozens of star systems. The rebellion wasn't just a handful of discontented species. It was a shadow government that had been preparing for galactic change for over a century. The hierarchy's greatest weakness is their own certainty, Elena explained as they walked through a command center filled with beings from dozens of different worlds. They're so convinced that their way is the only way to maintain order that they can't imagine alternatives. They don't look for resistance because they can't believe resistance is possible. Resonance of Truth led them to a massive holographic display that showed the galaxy in stunning detail. But this wasn't the official map that Marcus knew from his navigation systems. This version showed hidden trade routes, secret colonies, and communication networks that existed completely outside hierarchy oversight. We call it the deep web, the crystal being explained. Every species that has ever served the hierarchy has created ways to communicate and trade without official notice. What we've done is connect these hidden networks into something approaching an alternative civilization. How many species are part of this? Marcus asked. Actively? About 40, Elena said. Passively providing support or information. Nearly 300. The hierarchy thinks they rule a galaxy of loyal servants, but the truth is that most species are just waiting for someone to show them another way. Forest Singer gestured to another section of the display. Your rescue of Siraith has already begun to shift the balance. Word is spreading through the deep web that a human chose mercy over vengeance when faced with one of their supposed enemies. It is causing discussions in places where such discussions have not occurred for millennia. Marcus studied the display, trying to understand the scope of what he was seeing. What do you want from me? That depends, Elena said, on what you're willing to give. At minimum, we'd like you to share your story. Let other species hear directly from a human about why you saved Siraith. Help them understand that the hierarchy's propaganda about human nature is false. And at maximum, Elena, Resonance of Truth, and Forsinger exchanged looks that somehow conveyed entire conversations. At maximum, Elena said slowly, we'd like you to help us start the war that ends the hierarchy's rule forever. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus could hear the station's life support systems humming in the background. Siraith's presence in his mind was calm, patient, offering no pressure either way. I need to understand something, Marcus said finally. You say this is about liberation, about giving species the choice to govern themselves. But what happens after? What replaces the hierarchy? Forsinger's form shifted, taking on colors that Marcus somehow understood expressed approval. That is the correct question, Marcus-chun. And it is why we believe humans may be essential to what comes next. Resonance of Truth as crystal form chimed softly. The hierarchy maintains order through fear and imposed structure. But you humans have demonstrated something we thought was myth, the ability to create voluntary cooperation on a large scale. Your planetary governments, your trade networks, your exploration programs, all based on negotiated agreement rather than imposed dominance. Elena nodded. Most species never learned to organize beyond the tribal level before the hierarchy conquered them. They were given order from above rather than developing it from within. But humans had to figure out cooperation on your own, and somehow you made it work despite having no external authority forcing compliance. So you want us to teach other species how to be democratic? Marcus asked. We want you to prove that large-scale civilization is possible without imposed hierarchy, Elena said. And we want to give other species the chance to find their own paths, instead of having their futures decided by beings who see them as tools rather than people. Marcus looked around the command center at the dozens of different species working together with an efficiency that seemed impossible given their obvious biological differences. How do you coordinate all this? How do you make decisions when you don't even have compatible communication methods? Very carefully, Elena said with a smile, and with a lot of translation protocols. But mostly, we've learned that when people truly want to work together, they find ways to make it happen. The hierarchy believes that unity requires uniformity, resonance of truth added. We have discovered that diversity can be a source of strength if managed with respect rather than fear. Siratha's mental voice was gentle when it came to Marcus. Asterisk, they're not asking you to become something you are not, Marcus Chun. They're asking you to be exactly what you have already shown yourself to be. Asterisk, and if I say yes, if I agree to help start this war. Elena's expression became serious. Then, you become the most hunted being in the galaxy. The hierarchy will throw everything they have at stopping you, because they know that if word spreads that humans are willing to fight for other species' freedom, it will destroy the foundation of their power. But, Forsinger added, you will also become the symbol that unites resistance movements across the galaxy. Your choice to save Siraith has already inspired 3 species to openly defy hierarchy directives. Imagine what your active leadership could accomplish. Marcus walked to the observation windows, looking out at the fleet of ships being constructed in the system's shipyards. Each vessel represented hope for species that had never known freedom, courage from beings who had risked everything for the chance of change. The salvage business is about finding value in things other people have thrown away, he said slowly. Looks like you want me to salvage an entire galaxy. We want you to help us prove that it's not as broken as the hierarchy claims, Elena replied. Marcus turned back to the group, to the alien beings who had somehow placed their hopes in a human they'd never met, to the dragon whose rescue had started this entire chain of events. If we do this, he said, if we really try to overthrow 50,000 years of galactic order, what are our actual chances of success? Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, she smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. Honestly, I have no idea, but for the first time in my life, I think we might actually have a chance. And sometimes, that's enough to start a revolution. Marcus looked at Siraith, at the magnificent dragon who had become his friend and his responsibility. The alien's galaxy-deep eyes held encouragement, support, and something that might have been hope. All right, Marcus said, let's save the galaxy. But first, someone needs to explain to me how we're going to fight a war without becoming the very thing we're trying to destroy. Elena's smile widened. Now you're asking the right questions. Welcome to the revolution, Marcus Chun. Let's hope you're as good at changing the galaxy as you are at rescuing dragons. As if summoned by her words, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Red lights flashed in patterns that obviously meant immediate danger, and beings throughout the command center began moving with practiced urgency. What's happening? Marcus asked. Elena was already moving toward the communication consoles, her expression grim. The hierarchy found us. Long-range sensors are picking up a fleet approaching the system edge. Looks like your rescue mission just became our first real battle. Marcus felt his stomach drop. How long do we have? 6 hours, maybe 7 before they reach the station, came the reply from one of the technicians. Time enough to evacuate? Marcus asked. Elena shook her head. Time enough to fight. If we run now, they'll just hunt down everyone here one by one. But if we make a stand, if we show the galaxy that the hierarchy can be beaten, we prove that revolution is possible, Marcus finished. Exactly. The question is, are you ready to lead your first battle as commander of the Galactic Resistance? Marcus looked around at the beings who were already preparing for war, at the ships being readied for combat, at the dragon beside him whose people had died rather than surrender their principles. I guess we're about to find out, he said. The revolution was about to begin in earnest, and Marcus Chun was no longer just a witness to galactic history. He was about to help write it. The battle for Haven lasted 18 hours and changed the course of galactic history. Marcus had never commanded anything larger than a salvage ship, but somehow found himself coordinating the defense of an entire star system. The rebel fleet was outnumbered 3-1 by the hierarchy forces, but they had advantages their enemies hadn't expected. The first surprise came when the hierarchy fleet dropped out of hyperspace, expecting to find a small rebel outpost. Instead, they faced a coordinated defense network that had been years in the making. Hidden weapons platforms powered up throughout the system, turning asteroids and derelict ships into fortified positions. The second surprise came when Admiral Korath, the hierarchy's most feared enforcer, demanded the surrender of the human terrorist and received a response from over 40 different species, all declaring their allegiance to the resistance. But the biggest surprise came 12 hours into the battle, when hierarchy ships began changing sides. 3 cruisers from the enemy's left flank are powering down weapons, Elena reported from the command center. They're broadcasting surrender codes. No, wait. They're broadcasting alliance codes. They want to join us. Marcus stared at the tactical display in disbelief. That's impossible. The hierarchy's military is supposed to be completely loyal. Not when their own crews start asking why they're fighting to preserve a system that treats them like expendable tools. Resonance of truth chimed from its position at the communication array. Your story has been spreading through the deep web for weeks, Marcus Chun. Many soldiers have been wondering if there might be alternatives to blind obedience. Saraith, who had insisted on participating in the battle despite Marcus's protests, was coordinating with the dragon fighters who had somehow survived the massacre of his people. The sight of the great dragons working alongside human pilots was apparently having a profound effect on both sides of the conflict. The pattern continues to shift. Asterisk, the dragon's mental voice touched Marcus's mind. Asterisk, each act of mercy creates ripples. Each choice to trust rather than destroy opens new possibilities. Asterisk, the tide of battle turned completely when Admiral Korath himself requested a parley. Marcus found himself in the surreal position of negotiating with one of the galaxy's most powerful military commanders while sitting in the makeshift war room of a hidden rebel base. The Admiral appeared via holographic transmission, his crystalline features impossible to read by human standards. I know who you are, Marcus Chun of Terra, Korath said without preamble. You are the salvage operator who chose to rescue a dying enemy instead of claiming justifiable vengeance. The hierarchy considers you the greatest threat to galactic order in 50 millennia. And what do you consider me? Marcus asked. Korath was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, there was something in his translated voice that might have been wonder. I consider you the first rational being I have encountered in 3 centuries of service. You have done something that our greatest philosophers claimed was evolutionary impossible. You have chosen the welfare of another over your own survival with no expectation of reward. It wasn't that complicated, Marcus said. Someone needed help, and I could provide it. Do you understand what you have done to the foundations of hierarchy philosophy? For 50,000 years, we have maintained order based on the principle that intelligent beings are fundamentally selfish. That cooperation requires coercion. That peace demands the threat of violence. Admiral Korath's image flickered as his ship's systems reconfigured themselves. But if a supposedly primitive species like humanity can produce individuals capable of genuine altruism, then our entire understanding of the nature of intelligence is wrong. And if we're wrong about that, what else might we be wrong about? Marcus leaned forward. You can find out. Join us. Help us build something better than what the hierarchy offers. You asked me to betray 50,000 years of galactic order. I'm asking you to help create something worth having instead of just maintaining something that works through fear. The silence stretched until Marcus began to think the transmission had been cut. Then Korath spoke again. My fleet is withdrawing from the system, but we are not returning to hierarchy space. We will observe the outcome of your experiment. If you can prove that voluntary cooperation is superior to imposed order, perhaps it is time for new paradigms. The transmission ended, leaving Marcus staring at a tactical display that showed the most powerful military force in the galaxy simply leaving the battlefield. Well, Elena said from behind him, that's one way to win a war. But the real victory came the months that followed. Word of the battle at Haven spread throughout the galaxy faster than the hierarchy could suppress it. The story of a human who saved his enemy, and the alliance that formed around that simple act of mercy, became the spark that ignited resistance movements on thousands of worlds. The revolution wasn't the violent overthrow that everyone had expected. Instead, it was a cascade of species simply refusing to follow orders, choosing cooperation over coercion, deciding that they preferred freedom to safety. The hierarchy's response was predictably brutal at first. Entire worlds were punished for harboring rebellious thoughts. But each act of oppression only drove more species into the resistance. And the resistance was no longer a small network of hidden rebels. It had become an alternative civilization. Marcus found himself in the strange position of being the nominal leader of something that defied traditional leadership structures. The resistance operated more like a vast cooperative than a military organization, with each species contributing what they could and taking what they needed. You realize you're presiding over the death of hierarchy as a concept, Elena told him 6 months after the battle at Haven. They were standing on the observation deck of the New Dawn, a massive vessel that served as the mobile capital of what people were calling the Cooperative Alliance. Good, Marcus replied, watching a fleet of ships from dozens of different species working together to construct a new space station. Maybe it's time for something better. Saraith, who had become Marcus's constant companion and unofficial advisor, was resting nearby. The dragon had fully recovered from his ordeal and, more importantly, had become the symbol of what was possible when former enemies chose trust over conflict. The Deep Web reports that over 800 species have now declared independence from hierarchy rule, Saraith shared. And, more importantly, most of them are finding ways to coexist peacefully with their neighbors. How are they managing that without a central authority? Marcus asked. They're discovering what you humans learned long ago, that intelligent beings can choose to cooperate even when no one forces them to do so. The concepts of negotiation, compromise, and voluntary agreement are spreading faster than we ever imagined possible. Elena smiled. It helps that they have an example to follow. When species hear about the human who saved a dragon, and the dragon who became his friend, it gives them hope that their own conflicts don't have to be permanent. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some species struggled with the concept of self-governance after millennia of imposed order. Others had to overcome ancient prejudices and territorial disputes that had been suppressed rather than resolved under hierarchy rule. But they were working through these problems together, with help from species who had experience with voluntary cooperation. The humans, despite being relative newcomers to galactic civilization, found themselves in constant demand as mediators and advisors. Turns out, Marcus observed, that learning to work together without a central authority is actually pretty useful experience. The hierarchy didn't simply collapse overnight. Parts of it retreated to the galactic core, maintaining control over perhaps a quarter of their former territory. Other sections tried to reform themselves into less oppressive structures. A few attempted to negotiate alliances with the cooperative, though trust was understandably limited. Admiral Korath became the leader of something called the Reformed Territories, systems that had served the hierarchy, but were trying to find middle ground between imposed order and complete independence. Change is difficult, he admitted during one of his regular communications with Marcus. My people have never had to make decisions for themselves. They fear that without central authority, everything will collapse into chaos. Maybe it will, for a while, Marcus replied. But then they'll figure out how to fix it themselves instead of waiting for someone else to do it for them. You have remarkable faith in the wisdom of beings making their own choices. Marcus looked around the New Dawnist bridge at the dozens of different species working together not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. I've seen what they can accomplish when they're free to try. A year after the Battle of Haven, Marcus received a communication that changed his understanding of everything that had happened. The message came from Earth, from a government that had only recently learned that their species was at the center of a galactic revolution. But that wasn't what shocked Marcus. What shocked him was learning that his rescue of Sea Wraith hadn't been the first time a human had shown mercy to a dying enemy. It had been happening for decades, scattered incidents throughout human space that had gradually built a reputation for unpredictability and irrational compassion. "We've been keeping records," the message from Earth Command explained. Human merchants who shared supplies with stranded alien ships. Explorers who chose to heal injured beings they found on uncharted worlds. Colonists who offered sanctuary to refugees from species they'd never encountered before. Marcus shared the message with Elena and Sea Wraith, trying to understand the implications. "You mean this revolution didn't start with me saving a dragon?" he asked. Elena smiled. "You were just the spark that lit a fire that had been building for generations. Humans have been proving the hierarchy wrong about intelligent nature for decades. You just did it in a way that couldn't be ignored or suppressed. The patterns were always there," Sea Wraith added. "Your species has been demonstrating that cooperation and compassion are not evolutionary weaknesses. But it took your rescue of me to create a symbol that other species could rally around." So what happens now?" Marcus asked. The answer came sooner than expected. 2 years after the Battle of Haven, representatives from over 1,000 species gathered for what became known as the Galactic Cooperation Summit. The goal was ambitious: create a framework for interspecies relations based on voluntary cooperation rather than imposed hierarchy. Marcus found himself in the surreal position of giving the opening address to the largest gathering of intelligent beings in galactic history. 2 years ago, he said to an audience that filled a space station the size of a small moon, "I was a salvage operator who found a dying alien in a wrecked ship. I had a choice: leave him to die, or risk my life to save someone I'd never met." He paused, looking out at the sea of beings from species he was still learning to identify. "I chose to help him, not because I'm especially heroic, but because it was the right thing to do." That choice started a chain of events that has fundamentally changed our galaxy. But the real change didn't come from me. It came from all of you, choosing cooperation over conflict, trust over fear, hope over despair. The applause that followed came in a dozen different forms, from species that expressed approval through harmonics, color changes, electromagnetic emissions, and sounds that had no human equivalent. But the moment that defined the summit came when Sea Wraith himself addressed the assembly, speaking in harmonics that were somehow translated for every species present. "We gather here not as conquerors or conquered, not as rulers or ruled, but as equals seeking common ground. The hierarchy told us that peace required the strong to dominate the weak. But this human, Marcus Chun, showed us a different path. He proved that true strength comes from choosing mercy over vengeance, cooperation over domination." The dragon's mental voice carried to every being in the station. "We have learned that the greatest threat to galactic peace is not war between species, but the belief that such war is inevitable. By choosing to see former enemies as potential friends, we have discovered that the galaxy is large enough for all of us to flourish." The summit lasted 3 months and resulted in what became known as the Galactic Cooperative Compact, a framework for voluntary cooperation that replaced the hierarchy's imposed order with negotiated agreements. Not everyone joined immediately. Some species preferred isolation. Others chose regional alliances rather than galaxy-wide cooperation. A few attempted to create their own mini-hierarchies in border regions. But the fundamental change was irreversible. The galaxy had learned that cooperation was possible without coercion, and that lesson could never be unlearned. 5 years after rescuing a dying dragon from a wrecked ship, Marcus Chin stood on the observation deck of Haven Station, now the unofficial capital of the Cooperative Alliance. The system had been transformed from a hidden rebel base into a thriving center of interspecies commerce and diplomacy. Sea Wraith rested beside him. the dragon's scales now fully restored to their magnificent purple-blue shimmer. In the years since their first meeting, they had become more than friends. They had become symbols of what was possible when different species chose trust over suspicion. Any regrets? Elena asked, joining them at the viewport. She now served as the cooperative's first human ambassador, though her role was more mediator than ruler. Marcus considered the question seriously. His life had become far more complicated than he'd ever imagined. He was no longer just a salvage operator. He was a symbol, a leader, a bridge between species that had never learned to trust each other. But as he watched ships from hundreds of different worlds working together in the space around Haven, as he felt Suretha's contentment radiating through their mental link, as he saw Elena's satisfied smile, he knew his answer. None, he said. Turns out saving a dying alien was the best decision I ever made. The patterns continue to shift. Suretha observed with satisfaction. Each choice to trust creates new possibilities. Each act of mercy opens new paths. The galaxy is discovering that cooperation is more powerful than any weapon. So what's next? Marcus asked. Elena smiled, gesturing toward the starfield beyond the viewport. Well, we've only explored about 10% of the galaxy so far, and the cooperative keeps getting reports of intelligent species in unexplored regions. Apparently, they're interested in meeting the humans who started a revolution by being decent to their enemies. Marcus laughed, feeling the familiar pull of unknown spaces and undiscovered possibilities. Sounds like the salvage business just got a lot more interesting. He was no longer Marcus Chun, the salvage operator, alone in the darkness between stars. He was Marcus Chun, the bridge builder, the proof that compassion could change the galaxy, the human who had sparked a revolution by doing nothing more complicated than helping someone in need. And the galaxy, vast and full of wonders, was waiting to see what other impossible things might become possible when beings chose cooperation over conflict, mercy over vengeance, hope over fear. The revolution was complete, but the real work was just beginning. And for the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy faced the future not with fear, but with hope.